As World War II drew to a bloody close, the Third Reich began to rapidly crumble and Nazi leaders began to disappear, leaving behind piles of papers, ashes of burned archives, and secrets that could not be destroyed. Among the most mystical and still mind-boggling stories are the numerous secret bunkers of Hitler. Some of them, as we know, were destroyed by the Allies, others were sealed, and still others were simply forgotten. And it is about such forgotten places that our story begins, about a bunker that was considered a myth for decades until it was discovered in a dense forest in southern Germany. According to official data, by the end of the war, Hitler practically never left Berlin and settled in the Four Bunker, a well-known underground shelter where he spent his last days. However, historians claim that other facilities were built in parallel to this, designed to evacuate the Führer and his inner circle in the event of a complete collapse of the capital. One of these facilities was located in the Bavarian Alps, near Obersalzberg, a famous vacation spot for Hitler, and it was here, deep in the ground, that one of the most mysterious complexes was hidden, the Alpine Citadel, the name of which sounded more like a legend than reality. For decades, the existence of this complex was spoken of only in whispers. There was only fragmentary information, documents with SS seals, mentions in intercepted correspondence, strange entries in the diaries of officers. No one could say for sure whether this bunker was real or just part of the myths surrounding Hitler. Everything changed in 2023 when a small group of researchers, armed with new data from recently declassified American archives, set out to search for the alleged facility. Using drones with thermal imaging and ground-penetrating radar, the researchers conducted a series of surveys of the area where, according to theoretical calculations, the entrance to the abandoned bunker could be located. The signals confirmed that there was definitely something under a thick layer of earth and mossy rocks. Several weeks were spent clearing and strengthening the entrance before the group was able to get inside. What they saw shocked even seasoned historians. The entrance corridor, leading deep into the rock, was incredibly well preserved. Despite decades of neglect, the walls still retained remnants of paneling, electrical wiring was neatly laid, and the ventilation shafts were in working order. Everything indicated that the bunker was not just a shelter, but a well-thought-out system designed for long-term residents. And this was only the beginning. The first room they entered turned out to be a kind of reception area. On the floor were dusty, but clearly visible traces of military boots. On the wall was a half-rotted map of Europe with flags indicating the Allied positions in 1945. In the corner was an old radio station, covered in rust. The whole environment seemed frozen in time, as if the bunker's inhabitants had left in a hurry, leaving everything in its place. And it was this detail that became the cause of growing concern. What had made them leave this place so hastily? The researchers continued moving along the corridors, each of which led to a new room. Soon they found a warehouse with supplies, boxes of dry rations, sealed bottles of water, medicines, some of which were produced in 1944. All the items were of German origin, with the exception of one strange find, an empty box with markings in Japanese. This detail became the first warning bell hinting at a possible connection between the Nazis and Japanese allies in the last weeks of the war, possibly in the context of covert missions. The most disturbing discovery was a room with locked doors, behind which was a laboratory. Inside were tables, test tubes, boxes of chemical reagents, and strange metal cylinders. The inscriptions in German indicated some kind of purification program, which gave rise to several hypotheses, ranging from research in the field of biological weapons to experiments in creating alternative energy sources. Some journals found on the shelves contained formulas and notes that have not yet been deciphered, but the main discovery awaited the researchers at the very end of the complex. Behind a massive hermetically sealed door, which could only be opened with the help of heavy equipment, there was a room with iron boxes. Inside were films, photographs, documents. Among them were unknown photographs of high-ranking officers, diagrams of underground communications, and, most amazingly, plans for evacuation to South America. Long-standing rumors about Nazi escape routes were confirmed, and perhaps even the existence of a second Reserve 4 bunker somewhere in Argentina. This discovery was a sensation. For the first time in decades, an object was found that not only confirmed the existence of one of the most mysterious Nazi legends, but also opened up new, disturbing questions. Why was this bunker so carefully hidden? Who was the last one inside? Why was everything in perfect condition? And, most importantly, how far could the experiments go that no one knew about? After the researchers published the first data about the discovery of a bunker in the Bavarian Alps, the attention of the public and the secret services to this place grew exponentially. Journalists, independent historians, representatives of military archives, and, as eyewitnesses claimed, people without identification marks who arrived in black SUVs flocked to the foot of the mountain. The object was quickly taken under guard, and any work on its territory was strictly controlled. What was found in these dungeons that caused such a storm of interest? First of all, specialists from the historical department of the Bundeswehr began cataloguing all the artifacts found. Hundreds of documents were found, including personal notes of officers, evacuation plans, plans for engineering systems. Particular attention was drawn to a package of documents marked Nur für den Führer, only for the Führer. The papers were stored in a safe in the bunker's main headquarters and contained reports on a mysterious project called Eulenspiegel. The name, a reference to a German folk trickster, seemed an odd choice for wartime documentation. Inside were instructions for creating backup escape routes from Europe to South America and the Middle East, including a system of secret airfields and underwater routes. Some diagrams pointed to a base built deep in Argentina's Patagonia using Nazi camouflage technology. This information was quite controversial, since such rumors had been circulating for decades without any confirmation. Now, documents with seals and signatures gave these theories new meaning, but it wasn't just the escape routes that attracted attention. Samples of rare earth metals, whose properties were being studied by Nazi scientists as part of alternative energy projects, were found in the complex's labs. Some of the materials were of Japanese origin, indicating that collaboration with the Axis allies continued into the very last weeks of the war. One expert even suggested that the research might have been related to attempts to create a so-called clean bomb, a device capable of causing destruction without the use of uranium or plutonium. Meanwhile, archaeologists studying the bunker's architectural features came to an unexpected conclusion. The facility had at least 2 levels, and the second, lower one was still inaccessible. The rock that had collapsed after the exit had been blown up, reliably concealed the lower tunnels. Clearing work was initiated, but progress was slow. All that could be seen, with the help of cameras on long hoses, was a wide corridor and a huge metal door sealed from the inside. When the passage was cleared a few weeks later, the researchers descended to the lower level and discovered perhaps the most astonishing element of the complex, an underground hangar. There were 2 vehicles of unknown design, resembling a hybrid between an armored personnel carrier and a small aircraft. Judging by the drawings found nearby, these were prototypes of the Schattenvogel project, Shadow Bird. These machines were supposed to move both on the ground and in the air over short distances, and were intended to evacuate the command in case of an emergency threat. Next to the equipment, a closed compartment with personal belongings was found. Among them a black briefcase with the initials AH inside was a set of personal notes, copies of speeches, and a small leather notebook with a handwritten note. When the time comes, they will find neither a body nor a trace. Only fear. These lines gave rise to a wave of speculation. Was Hitler really preparing to escape from Berlin in the last days, but in advance? And was this complex used as a departure point? At the same time, data began to arrive from an analysis of documents transferred to the University of Freiburg. Among them were pages describing the so-called Dammering Protocol, a sequence of actions in the event of the complete collapse of the Reich. These instructions included not only a physical evacuation, but also an operation to destroy traces, falsifying deaths, burning bodies, creating false evidence. Everything pointed to the fact that the idea of a suicide in the bunker could have been part of an elaborate production, organized long before April 1945. A room that served as a storage room for microfilms was also discovered. Some of them were deciphered. Among other things, there were lists of Nazis who allegedly left Europe through neutral countries, often with the help of false Red Cross passports. The list included not only SS officers, but also scientists, engineers and financiers. All this strengthened the assumption that the Third Reich was planning its rebirth in another place and in another form. However, the most disturbing findings concerned records of people who could have been used as subjects for experiments in the lower level of the bunker. Strange containers with frozen tissue samples were found, some of human origin. According to one of the forensic experts, the sealed capsules could have contained not only DNA, but also viruses that are still unknown to modern science. The question arose, was this bunker hiding a program similar to the infamous experiments of Joseph Mengele? The scandal was raging. The German government was forced to admit the existence of the facility, and a real battle for access began around it, between historians, international organizations and secret services. Some researchers were even attacked and threatened. It is unknown whether anyone managed to take the most valuable artifacts with them, but a number of finds disappeared without a trace. Those who worked at the facility in the first weeks talked about this among themselves. All this only fueled public interest and conspiracy theories. The Nazis may indeed have built something more than just a bunker. It may have been a node in a global network that ensured the survival of an ideology even after losing the war. And it all started with a few radar signals received in 2023, when the press began to report on the findings in the bunker. A wave of independent investigations began. Historians, bloggers, paranormal researchers, and the simply curious. Everyone wanted to know what the complex was hiding. One little known detail, which went almost unnoticed in official reports, attracted particular attention. In one of the rooms on the lower level, strange symbols were found on the walls, painted with red paint, which, according to the results of analysis, contained traces of blood. The symbols resembled a combination of runic and alchemical signs. This caused a storm of speculation. Some claimed that not just scientific, but occult experiments were carried out in the bunker. These assumptions were confirmed by the found diaries of an SS officer, Helmut Dresden. In his entries, he mentions participating in the project Runnensturm, storming the ruins. It was a classified project, allegedly supervised personally by Heinrich Himmler, the purpose of which was to study the energy interactions of man with space. Dresden described strange rituals combined with the operation of devices that recorded electromagnetic pulses under special conditions. In one of his entries, he claims that success has been achieved. The door is open. What kind of door he had in mind is unknown, but in the archive, along with the diary, they found a diagram of the so-called resonance chamber, built on principles similar to the ideas of Nikola Tesla. Some researchers have suggested that the Runnensturm project could have been an attempt by the Nazis to go beyond traditional science, to create a weapon based on phenomena that cannot be explained by modern physics. But all attempts to restore the installation ended in failure. Too much was destroyed, and some of the elements, apparently, were taken out of the bunker before the end of the war. Meanwhile, the documentary filmmakers working on the bunker interviewed local residents. One of them, 84-year-old Johann Kranz, said that as a child he heard stories from his father about trucks driving up the mountain at night and sounds coming from underground. One day, the boy and his friends decided to go there, and, according to him, he saw from afar 3 men in silver suits and masks coming out of the tunnel. They were carrying some containers and got into a black car, after which they disappeared into the forest. At the time, no one believed him, but now his story has acquired an ominous credibility. Some expeditions tried to find additional entrances to the bunker. One of these holes was discovered under a lake located several kilometers from the main entrance. This caused a sensation. The tunnel was completely flooded, but remote-controlled cameras showed a reinforced structure with hermetic doors. Someone suggested that it would have been possible to escape from this tunnel even if the facility had been completely captured. Interestingly, it was through this route that, as indicated in one of the documents, the key character could have left. The name in the report was shaded, but the initials were AH. Artifacts recovered from the bottom of the lake confirmed the guess about the existence of a water escape line. Fragments of the boat's hull were found, the markings on which corresponded to the standards of the Kriegsmarine underwater vehicles. However, the main discovery was waiting further. In one of the sealed compartments, which was opened, they found a sealed container with a set of microfilms and audio recordings. Their decoding is still ongoing, but it is already known that on one of the tapes a voice can be heard, presumably belonging to Hitler, giving a speech that had not been recorded anywhere before. This gave rise to a new wave of theories about his possible survival. Other elements of the complex also turned out to be interesting. One of the rooms contained a set of medical equipment, including extremely primitive incubators and capsules. The capsules themselves were heated, and their walls bore claw marks. Scientists were puzzled. Were these human specimens or something else? Later, in the records found, there was a mention of the project Hellenkind, Child from Hell. It spoke of attempts to breed special agents with altered physiology, capable of enduring extreme conditions, but there is no confirmation that any of these experiments was successful. However, the most alarming thing was that specific items disappeared from a number of storage facilities. Independent journalists reported that some boxes with the inscription Nix Defnen, do not open, were secretly removed in the first days after the discovery of the bunker. Where exactly? No one knows. There is a version that some of these materials fell into the hands of private collectors, while others ended up in the classified funds of American or Russian intelligence services. Meanwhile, a scandal erupted within Germany itself. The Society of Military Historians accused the authorities of concealing information. A special commission was created, but its report was classified. Only a few pages made it into the press, from which it became clear that the materials found could undermine the historical version of the events of 1945. Some politicians even proposed declaring the bunker a place of international significance and transferring it under UN control, but the German government did not agree to this. Meanwhile, strange things began to happen around the site. Several researchers complained of feeling unwell after a long stay in the lower level of the bunker. One of them claimed to have seen moving shadows on the wall, although he was alone there at the time. Another said he heard voices in an incomprehensible language. Psychologists attributed this to stress, but one of the expedition members later committed suicide, leaving a note with a single phrase, "They never left." In the end, it became clear that the discovered bunker was hiding much more than could have been assumed. This is not just an underground shelter. It is a hub where forgotten technologies, ambitions, fears and secrets converge. It holds not only evidence of the past, but also questions to which we still have no answers. When the expeditions reached the lower tier of the bunker, it became clear that the main infrastructure of the facility was not located on the visible levels. Behind a massive hermetic door hidden behind a collapsed tunnel, a passage opened into depths previously not recorded on any of the planned diagrams. These levels turned out to be a real underground city: narrow passages, technical rooms, archive storage, laboratories and chambers with powerful ventilation. Everything looked as if the personnel had left these rooms in a hurry. Folders were left on the tables, reagents were in the devices, and complex calculations and graphs were on the boards. It was shocking. Everything inside was preserved almost in its original form, as if time had stopped there. The most intriguing thing was that a frozen chamber was discovered in one of the isolated blocks. It was guarded by a 2-level locking system, and the help of military engineers was needed to open it. Inside were cylindrical capsules covered in frost. One of them was opened, and inside was an object wrapped in a special fabric resembling carbon fiber. When the fabric was unrolled, something resembling a mummified creature appeared before the researchers. Its appearance was vaguely human, but with a number of anomalies. The skull had a disproportionately elongated shape, the eye sockets were deep set, and the fingers were thin, 6 on each hand. DNA analysis yielded strange results. The biomaterial was not completely human, with impurities that had not previously been recorded in known databases. The official report on the discovery was never published. But rumors spread like wildfire. Internet forums, conspiracy theorists, journalists, even employees of former intelligence agencies began actively discussing, were the Nazis experimenting with alien creatures? Or were they mutants, the result of genetic experiments, and if so, for what purpose? One of the versions was the assumption that they were trying to create a soldier of the future in the bunker, an organism adapted to radiation, underground conditions, and even airless space. Next to the biological laboratories, they found another room, an archive with metal boxes. Inside were hundreds of microfilms and films. Some of them were immediately sent for digitization. The footage showed classified tests, footage of test subjects, strange machines with rotating elements similar to gravity stabilizers. One of the films was of particular interest. It showed a room completely filled with mirrors. In the center was a man in a protective suit. The camera recorded how the reflections began to move out of time with the actions of the figure in the center. Then the frame ended. The researchers found out that this part of the complex had a separate name, Sector Delta. According to surviving records, it was under the direct control of the ONENAB department. The work carried out here concerned the topic of mental projections and going beyond dimensions. Of course, it sounds like science fiction, but the facts spoke for themselves. Magnetic field anomalies recorded by the devices, severe headaches among the researchers, sudden equipment failures. However, the most shocking discovery was yet to come. Behind one of the walls with mysterious symbols was an empty space, a hidden chamber, where no official passage led. To get inside, they had to break through the concrete. Behind the wall was a round room, in the center of which stood a chair, entwined with cables and copper coils. The walls were covered with reliefs reminiscent of Slavic symbols, but with elements unknown in the academic tradition. In front of the chair was a screen connected to a system similar to an analog computer. A bloody journal lay on the floor. Its last entry, "He left. We could not hold him. Forgive us." The signature was illegible. Experts hypothesized that experiments were being conducted here on consciousness transfer, or the creation of a certain mental field. It sounds crazy, but these are the exact words that were used in the descriptions of the documents. An experiment to go beyond the human shell. An additional concern was caused by the fact that another capsule was found nearby. It was empty. Against the backdrop of these discoveries, real hysteria began in the media. Newspapers wrote about the laboratory of evil, bloggers organized expeditions, even famous politicians began to talk about the need for a complete ban on research in the bunker. Local residents began to complain about strange dreams, and tourists heard sounds reminiscent of screams near the entrance to the tunnel. The authorities explained this by natural acoustic effects and psychological suggestion, but an expedition of scientists who arrived with independent measuring devices recorded vibrations in the infrasound range, which could indeed cause anxiety and hallucinations. In the meantime, a message from an anonymous source appeared. He claimed that he had previously worked in the archives of German intelligence and had seen documents stating that special materials had been transported to this bunker from Berchtesgaden, the very end of the war. Among them were Artifact V and Mind Carrier. Nobody knew what it was. But the coincidence with the found objects was frightening. At the same time, one of the private research groups announced the creation of a virtual model of the bunker. Based on 3D scanning and cartographic data, they recreated the internal structure of the object and discovered an anomaly. According to calculations, there should have been more space inside the mountain than the measurements showed. That is, somewhere there was another hidden zone, perhaps completely autonomous and not connected to the rest of the system. But they have not yet been able to get there. The expedition's latest research was aimed at identifying inconsistencies in the bunker's design. After analyzing the ground-penetrating radar data, it became clear that the structure of the facility contained dead zones, spaces not shown on the original plans. Experts suggested the presence of an additional compartment, something like a safe, carefully hidden and possibly separated from the rest of the infrastructure. The location was designated Anomaly D17. It was located in the lower part of the complex, under the main engineering unit. Getting there was no easy task. The passages were blocked, some of the floors had collapsed, and the air was filled with the pungent smell of rust and chemical compounds. The work was carried out under the strictest control, with the involvement of robots and remote manipulators. After a week of painstaking analysis, a passage was opened, and what was on the other side amazed even the most skeptical expedition members. The room was practically sterile. The walls were made of polished metal. The air was fresh, as if the ventilation system inside was still working. In the center of the room, there was an object, a large cylinder, similar to an industrial capsule. On its body were engraved numbers and letters, designated as Project Eisenlich 12. Next to it was a terminal with a mechanical keyboard and a slot for films. One of the participants found instructions written in German: "Do not open without permission," from the SS Central Office. Despite the ban, it was decided to conduct a non-invasive scan of the capsule. The scan showed that inside there was an object of complex configuration, possibly electronic, biomechanical in nature. The capsule was partially protected by a layer of lead, which means that the contents could be radioactive. After a day of discussions, the capsule was opened. Inside was a container with microfilms, films and some device resembling an early version of a computer. The device was placed in an isolator and connected to a modern computer. After the launch, a black and white image of a man in an SS uniform appeared on the screen, speaking into the camera. He introduced himself as Dr. Heinrich Kromm. The recording lasted 17 minutes. He claimed that in 1945, after the destruction of Berlin, several scientists who survived were transferred to this bunker. Their task was to preserve and protect what he called the information core of the Third Reich. According to him, this was a set of data, including scientific developments, blueprints, archives of the ONENUB, as well as data on an unknown project involving specialists evacuated from Antarctica and South America. He further claimed that inside the capsule there was evidence of contacts with external intelligence. This was not deciphered in more detail, but the tapes did record radio signals that could not be decoded. The following terms were also mentioned: Area 43, Operation Silver Mist, Laboratory and Lux. These words had not been previously found in any of the archives. Special attention was drawn to the drawings of spherical objects with the captions Magnetflugkörper Modell V7. Perhaps these were prototypes of the flying discs that were legendary. On one of the microfilms, it was possible to decipher a list of names. Among them were scientists whose names are known in history, but what they were working on at the end of the war remains a mystery. There were also names that were not recorded in any official database. This suggested that some of the personnel were completely classified, without a trace, without biographies, without subsequent mentions. One of the film boxes contained photographs. They showed equipment similar to a particle accelerator located in a mountainous area. In the background were men in white coats and black masks. Caption: Test Series 3, Breakthrough Achieved. Test Series 3, Breakthrough Achieved. No further information was available on this matter. And here is the last find in the bunker: a metal container with an object covered in fabric. Inside was a black stone that seemed to absorb light. When the devices approached, they recorded disturbances in the electromagnetic fields. It was decided not to touch the object. It was isolated, and soon the governments of Norway and Germany signed a joint protocol on further study under the auspices of an international scientific commission. After the publication of the first reports, protests began. Some accused the scientists of concealing information, while others believed that the object should be destroyed. Theories surfaced in the media that the found artifact was not just a rarity, but part of a program to create weapons based on paranormal energy. There were even claims that Germany intended to restore some of the technology from the found bunker. In response to this, the German government issued an official statement: no developments from the Third Reich will be used for modern purposes. All found objects have been transferred to the disposal of the International Commission for the Study of Historical Artifacts. But mistrust grew in society. What were the scientists hiding? Why was there a flight ban around the bunker? What exactly was found, and what was its true nature? Against this backdrop, an independent documentary group published a short film instructing the bunker's final days of operation. It claimed that the facility was meant to be the final restart of Nazi ideology. Somewhere inside, the authors believed, a message for future generations was stored, and it may have already been activated. The script is not finished. What was found is just the tip of the iceberg. As of today, the bunker is closed, the archives are classified, and the international community is demanding full disclosure.